On the morning of March 11, 2011, a 40-year-old fisherman named Mikio Watanabe was out at sea off the coast of Miyagi Prefecture when the ocean did something he had never seen in his life. The water around his boat began to drain away from the shore, pulled back, as if someone had yanked a plug from the bottom of the Pacific. He knew exactly what that meant. He had less than 20 minutes.
He breaks down when he remembers the wave coming over the wall as he ran to the hills with his wife. He tells me this isn't a bad place and tsunamis don't happen that often, but after seeing the great wave, my wife has decided we should not be here.
What followed was the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japanese history. A tsunami that reached the height of a 10-story building in some places, and a nuclear catastrophe that forced 154,000 people from their homes and left entire cities uninhabitable for years. 3 disasters stacked on top of each other, each one triggering the next. And Japan, one of the most disaster-prepared nations on Earth, was not ready for any of them. This is the story of March 11th, 2011, and it starts at the bottom of the ocean. The Japan Trench runs along the eastern coast of Japan, where the Pacific Plate slides underneath the Eurasian Plate at a rate of about 3 inches per year. 3 inches doesn't sound like much, but over centuries, that pressure builds. The tectonic plates lock together, bending, straining, storing energy like a coiled spring. Every so often, that spring releases. Japan sits inside what geologists call the Ring of Fire. It's home to roughly 1,500 earthquakes every year. Japanese children learn earthquake drills the way American children learn fire drills. Buildings in Tokyo are engineered to sway rather than collapse. The country has the best early warning systems in the world. They had prepared for disaster better than almost anyone. But what struck on March 11th was not the kind of disaster anyone had fully prepared for. At 2:46 p.m. local time, a 500-kilometer stretch of the Japan Trench ruptured. The Pacific Plate lurched forward by as much as 50 meters in some places. That's not a gradual slip. That's a catastrophic lurch. The energy released in those seconds was equivalent to roughly 600 million times the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The resulting earthquake measured 9.0 on the moment magnitude scale, making it the 4th most powerful earthquake ever recorded anywhere on Earth. Tokyo, 370 kilometers to the south, shook for 6 minutes. 6 minutes doesn't sound like a long time until you are inside a building, watching the ceiling tiles rain down, watching the walls flex, listening to car alarms go off across the entire city. Japan's early warning system gave residents about 80 seconds of advance notice before the shaking began. That's enough time to get under a desk, to move away from windows, to stop a train. And those 80 seconds saved lives. But they couldn't prepare anyone for what the earthquake was about to trigger. The seafloor displacement didn't just release energy into the ground. It also displaced the ocean above it. When 500 kilometers of seafloor shifts vertically, the water column on top of it shifts too. That displacement travels outward in every direction as a wave. Not the kind of wave you surf. More like a ripple in a bathtub, except the bathtub is the Pacific Ocean and the ripple is moving at the speed of a commercial jet aircraft. This is a tsunami. In the open ocean, a tsunami is nearly invisible. It might only raise the surface a few feet, spread over a wavelength of hundreds of kilometers. Ships at sea can pass directly over one without knowing. But as the wave approaches shore and the ocean floor rises to meet it, the wave compresses. All that energy has nowhere to go but up. The wave that was barely noticeable in deep water becomes a wall of water in the shallows. The Japanese government's alert system detected the earthquake and immediately broadcast tsunami warnings across every radio and television station in the country. Emergency sirens activated along the coast. Residents were told to move to higher ground immediately. Some listened, many did not. The thing about tsunami warnings in Japan is that they had become almost routine. Dozens of warnings had been issued in recent decades. Most had produced waves of a meter or less, waves that disappointed rather than destroyed. There was a psychological numbness that had set in along the coast. Warning after warning, minimal consequences. So when the sirens sounded on March 11th, some residents assumed this was going to be another close call. Another 2-foot surge. Another warning that turned out to be nothing. It was not nothing. The first wave reached the coast of Iwate Prefecture approximately 30 minutes after the earthquake. It arrived in some areas as a fast-moving surge, in others as a churning wall that rose 10, 15, sometimes 20 meters above sea level as it pushed inland. The town of Miyako recorded a wave height of 40.5 meters at Ryoishi. That's taller than a 12-story building, measured not at a cliffside, but as the height the water reached when it pushed into the bay. Entire towns were erased. The city of Rikuzen Takeda had a population of around 23,000 people. Its downtown district sat behind a seawall that had stood for decades. The tsunami overwhelmed the seawall in seconds and rolled through the city for over a kilometer inland, stripping buildings down to their foundations. 70,000 trees that lined the coast were destroyed. Only one survived. That single tree became a national symbol, called the Miracle Pine, and it became famous not just for surviving, but because of everything around it that didn't. The coastal town of Minamisanraku lost more than 800 of its 17,000 residents. The emergency management officer for the town, a 25-year-old woman named Miki Endo, stayed at her post at the town's disaster response center, broadcasting evacuation warnings over the loudspeakers even as the water rose around the building. She was still broadcasting when the tsunami took the center. Her body was found months later. The statistics from March 11th are enormous. Nearly 16,000 people confirmed dead, over 2,500 still listed as missing, 120,000 buildings destroyed, nearly 500,000 people displaced, more than 300 kilometers of coastline damaged or destroyed. The economic loss was estimated at around $235 billion, making it the costliest natural disaster in history up to that point. But those numbers, as enormous as they are, only tell you part of what happened on March 11th. Because at the same moment the tsunami was erasing coastal towns, something else was going wrong at a nuclear power plant 225 kilometers south of Tokyo. The Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant sat on the coast of Fukushima Prefecture. It was operated by the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, and it had been generating electricity since 1971. It was not the newest plant, but it was considered safe. It had backup systems for its backup systems. When the earthquake struck, sensors detected the shaking and the plant's 6 reactors automatically shut down, inserting control rods to stop the nuclear fission process. That part worked exactly as designed. But stopping the fission process doesn't immediately stop the heat. Nuclear fuel continues to generate what's called decay heat after shutdown. And if that heat isn't removed by coolant, the reactor core can overheat. To remove that heat, you need power to run the cooling pumps. The earthquake had knocked out the external power grid, so the plant switched to its emergency diesel generators. That also worked as designed. Then the tsunami arrived. The seawall protecting Fukushima Daiichi was built to withstand a 5.7-meter wave. The wave that struck the plant on March 11th was somewhere between 11 and 15 meters. It overtopped the seawall by a factor of roughly 2.5 times. The diesel generators, located in basements, were inundated and failed within minutes. The backup batteries that remained could power cooling systems for about 8 hours. After that, the fuel would overheat. The coolant would boil off. and the containment structures would be under extraordinary pressure from the steam and hydrogen building up inside them. The plant's workers and managers knew what they were facing. So did the government. The Tokyo Electric Power Company and Japan's Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency began scrambling to get power restored, to get mobile generators on site, to figure out a way to keep the fuel cool. But roads were destroyed. The generators they needed couldn't get through, and time was running out. Reactor 1 began showing signs of significant fuel damage within hours of the tsunami. By the afternoon of March 12th, roughly 24 hours after the earthquake, the hydrogen that had built up inside the reactor building ignited. The explosion blew apart the upper structure of the building. It was captured on camera and broadcast around the world. People watching it assumed the reactor itself had exploded. It hadn't, but the explosion made containment vastly more difficult and sent a new wave of fear across Japan and beyond. If you dig into stories like this every week, subscribe. We cover disasters and the decisions that shape them every week. Over the following days, reactors 2 and 3 also experienced fuel damage, and both had hydrogen explosions. Reactor 4, which had been shut down for maintenance before the earthquake, had a fire in its spent fuel pool. The situation at the plant was deteriorating faster than anyone could manage it. Japan's Prime Minister at the time, Naoto Kan, later said there was a moment when the government considered whether the Tokyo metropolitan area, home to 35 million people, might need to be evacuated.
In Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, TEPCO workers, Japanese self-defense forces, police, and firefighters from Tokyo, Osaka, and other areas of Japan are risking their lives engaging in rescue and recovery activities. I'd like to express my sincere respect and gratitude for their efforts.
The scenario they feared was not just a Chernobyl-scale release, but something worse. A complete loss of control across all 6 reactors, with no ability to stop the chain reaction of failures. That scenario didn't happen, but it came closer than the public knew at the time. TEPCO and the government established an exclusion zone around the plant, initially 20 kilometers, then extended. Residents within that zone had hours to grab what they could carry and leave. Many assumed they would be back within days. Some of them never returned. Entire communities, towns that had existed for generations, were left standing but uninhabitable. Houses with cars still in driveways, with laundry still on the line, with family photos still on walls. Empty. The cleanup of the Fukushima Daiichi site began almost immediately and continues today. Workers have removed most of the debris from the damaged buildings. They've pumped and filtered hundreds of thousands of tons of contaminated water, storing it in massive tanks on the site. They've slowly decommissioned some of the reactors. But the fuel itself, the melted cores at the bottom of reactors 1, 2, and 3, has not been removed. It can't be, not yet. The radiation levels inside the buildings are still high enough to disable robots. The complete decommissioning of the site is currently projected to take decades. There's a question that comes up every time this disaster is discussed, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. How much of this was unavoidable, and how much was a failure of human judgment? The earthquake was unavoidable. The tsunami was unavoidable. But a 2012 investigation by an independent parliamentary commission concluded that the Fukushima nuclear accident was, in their words, a man-made disaster.
The Fukushima nuclear accident is often seen as a consequence of a rare natural disaster. But a tough new report from Japan concludes that the accident was man-made in more ways than one.
The seawall had been kept low because raising it would have been expensive and would have signaled to the public that the plant was dangerous. Warnings about the plant's vulnerability to large tsunamis had been raised internally at TEPCO for years and set aside. Emergency equipment was inadequate. The response was delayed by uncertainty about who had authority to make what decisions. The earthquake did what earthquakes do. The tsunami did what tsunamis do. But the nuclear meltdown was shaped by choices, by cost calculations, by institutional reluctance to acknowledge risk, Japan learned from March 11th in ways that went beyond engineering. The country's entire relationship with nuclear power changed. In the months following the disaster, all of Japan's nuclear reactors were taken offline for safety inspections. At the peak of the shutdown, Japan was running without nuclear power for the first time since 1970. Energy prices rose. Businesses adapted. Some plants were eventually restarted after upgrades. But the public debate over nuclear energy in Japan remains unresolved to this day. The physical rebuilding of the coast took years. Seawalls were raised to heights that struck some residents as almost absurd. Concrete barriers 15 meters tall that blocked the ocean view from coastal towns. Some communities accepted the walls. Others refused them, choosing to live with the risk rather than lose their relationship with the sea. That tension between safety and the life they wanted to live is still playing out in coastal Japan. Of the 154,000 residents who were evacuated from the Fukushima exclusion zone, a significant number have returned as the zone has gradually been reopened. But many have not, and many will not. The communities that were evacuated exist in a complicated middle space, technically habitable in many areas, but changed in ways that go beyond radiation levels. Restaurants are closed. Schools are closed. The social fabric that held those towns together dispersed when the people left, and it hasn't fully reassembled. The single pine tree in Rikuzen Takata, the miracle pine, eventually died from salt water damage in 2012. But the town had already decided it was going to preserve it. Workers cut it down, treated the wood, reconstructed it with an artificial trunk, and put it back in place on the same spot. It stands there now, technically no longer alive, but standing. An object that isn't quite what it appears to be, but is still, somehow, exactly what it needs to be. That's probably the most honest summary of where Japan is after March 11, 2011. Rebuilt in many places, but not quite the same. Still standing. Anyway, that's that. YouTube's already picked your next one. It's on screen.